The rain had arrived before dawn, sweeping across Ravenshire like a curtain of silver threads gently pulled over the land. It was the kind of rain that softened the outline of everything it touched. The distant hills, the stone terraces, the old oak trees that had stood guard for generations. And yet, despite its quiet elegance, the morning carried an unmistakable sense of tension, as though the air itself held its breath, waiting for something in the great house to shift. Inside the Duke's study, the world was dim and motionless. A single lamp burned near the edge of a massive mahogany desk, casting a muted golden glow upon ledgers, correspondence, and the Duke's discarded gloves. The fire crackled softly behind him, but he did not turn toward it. He remained at the tall window, hands clasped behind his back, posture impossibly straight, rigid enough to suggest that he had become part of the stone walls themselves. His Grace, Alistair Montgomery, the 8th Duke of Ravenshire, was a man carved out of restraint. Every gesture, every look, every breath he allowed himself had been shaped by duty, discipline, and loss, especially loss. It was not a subject mentioned in his presence, nor something he himself dared revisit in thought, but it lived inside him like a shadow that refused to yield to the sun. He had vowed at 19 never again to love anyone deeply enough to lose them. It had been a private vow, a desperate vow, and he had honored it with almost religious dedication. Until the day he married Lady Helena Whitmore 3 years before, he had believed himself safe from ever breaking it. Marriage had been an obligation, a matter of lineage, propriety, alliances between houses, and Helena had seemed ideal. Graceful, composed, intelligent, unfailingly gentle, a woman who had not asked for his heart, nor expected affection from a man known for having none to give. She had entered Ravenshire as though stepping into a cold wind, and she had borne it with dignity. And yet, in the quiet moments he pretended not to notice, something in her presence unsettled him, a warmth he did not know how to approach, a softness that made him acutely aware of his own rigid edges. He would never admit it aloud, but there were days when he caught himself listening for her footsteps in the hallway, days when her voice in the drawing room caused a tightness in his chest he refused to name, days when he felt her looking at him across the dining table and had to force himself to remain composed. He felt far too much and showed absolutely nothing. That was the way of Alistair Montgomery. The world knew him as cold. Helena knew him as distant. He knew himself as terrified. A knock sounded at the door. Alistair did not turn. One must always greet interruption with calm. That had been the motto drilled into him since childhood. "Your Grace," came the soft voice of his butler, Mr. Rowley, a man who had served the family since Alistair was a boy. Her. Grace has returned from her ride. A pause. A heartbeat. Alistair stiffened almost imperceptibly, a reaction no one else would have noticed, but Mr. Rowley certainly did. "Very well," the Duke replied, his tone even, unbothered. "She should change before attending breakfast." "Yes, Your Grace," the door closed. Helena always rode early in the morning when she needed to think, or when she needed to forget. He suspected it was the latter today. The previous evening had been tense. Lord Pembroke's ball, a glittering, crowded affair in London, had been their first public appearance together in nearly 2 months. Helena had looked exquisite in pale blue silk, her hair swept up with pearls. She had smiled when courtesy required, danced when invited, behaved as any duchess should. But Alistair had felt something beneath her composure, a coolness he could not decipher. And then, halfway through the evening, something had happened that he had not been able to forget. They had been standing near the grand staircase when a familiar voice cut through the murmur of the ballroom. Helena Whitmore. He had turned, and so had she. Lord Sebastian Ashcombe, son of Viscount Ashcombe, the charming golden-haired gentleman who had once been Helena's childhood friend, had approached with a smile that was far too warm for Alistair's comfort. "I scarcely recognized you," Sebastian had said, his eyes moving over her with an ease that made the Duke's jaw tighten. "You have grown even. Lovelier since our last meeting. Truly quite beautiful." Beautiful. The word had hung between them like a spark touching dry tinder. Helena had flushed, surprised. She had murmured a polite thank you, nothing inappropriate, nothing untoward. But Alistair had felt something sharp twist inside him, a feeling he despised, a feeling beneath him, a feeling he had sworn never again to allow inside his chest. Jealousy. Men whispered that the Duke of Ravensshire was the most self-possessed gentleman in London. If they had seen the way his hand tightened around Helena's waist in that moment, they might have reconsidered. Sebastian, of course, had noticed it, and the glimmer in the man's eyes had not been friendly. But Helena, she had noticed nothing of her husband's reaction, or perhaps she had noticed and chosen wisely to pretend otherwise. On the carriage ride home, she had sat opposite Alistair, hands folded neatly in her lap, her gaze drifting to the darkened window. He had wanted to speak, to say something, but pride had sealed his throat, and Helena, dignified and wounded in a way she tried to hide, had not spoken to him either. A silence colder than the night itself had travelled with them all the way back to Ravensshire. Now, in the morning light, Alistair attempted to convince himself he was unaffected, but the truth pressed against his ribs with the stubbornness of something long denied. He had not slept. Not because of Helena's silence. He had grown accustomed to the quiet distance between them, but because of the way she had looked at Sebastian, not with longing, not with affection, but with recognition, as though Sebastian were a piece of a former life, a life where she had once been seen, noticed, valued, and that, more than the compliment, had unsettled Alistair. He turned from the window abruptly. Enough. Feelings served no purpose. Feelings were dangerous. He had buried them for years, and would bury them again. He took a steadying breath and straightened his coat. He would greet Helena at breakfast with the same controlled civility as always. He would behave as a duke, not as a man unmoored by a single word spoken by another. He would ignore the irrational surge of heat he had felt when Sebastian dared call her beautiful. He would... A soft, hesitant knock interrupted him. He frowned. Mr. Rowley never knocked twice. "Enter," he ordered. The door opened slowly, and there she was, Helena, her riding habit still damp from the rain, tendrils of chestnut hair escaping her hat, cheeks flushed from the cold morning air. There was something fragile in her expression, something she tried to hide, but Alistair saw it in the way her fingers curled slightly around her gloves. She curtsied with graceful formality. "Good morning, Your Grace." Her voice was quiet, quieter than usual. Alistair felt something shift inside him, a small, unwelcome ache. "Lady Ravensshire," he replied, with a polite incline of his head. "You are soaked. You should change at once." She hesitated, just a breath, but he noticed. "I wish to speak with you first," she said softly. He stiffened. She never sought him out, never initiated conversation unless necessary. He gestured for her to enter fully. Though his pulse had begun a slow, heavy drum, Helena stepped inside the room, and the scent of rain and lavender drifted toward him. She did not move far, only to the center of the carpet, hands clasped. "About last night," she began. His jaw tightened. "Nothing of consequence occurred," he replied quickly. "Lord Ashcombe's comment was—" She cut him off gently. Helena rarely interrupted anyone. Her doing so startled him. "It was not his comment I wished to address, Your Grace." She lifted her gaze to him, and there was a sadness in it that reached him before he could fortify himself. "It is the silence." He blinked. She continued before he could respond. "Between us." The words were soft, simple, yet they struck the Duke like a blow. He had expected reproach, jealousy, irritation, but not this, never this. For the first time in a long while, Alistair felt truly unbalanced. "There is no issue between us," he said, more sharply than intended. Helena's eyes dimmed a fraction. "I see," she whispered. "Then I apologize for intruding." She curtsied again, but this time the movement trembled at the edges. She turned to leave, and something inside Alistair, something buried, long chained, pulled violently against his pride. He opened his mouth. For a second, a single wretched second, he nearly called her name, but pride, old and merciless, clamped its hand over his throat, and Helena left the room quietly, leaving Alistair alone in the silence he had created. Yet for the first time, it did not feel like victory. It felt like the beginning of loss. The rest of the morning passed in a manner that most of Ravenshire's household might have considered ordinary, but for the Duke, nothing felt remotely familiar. The quiet clatter of breakfast dishes being cleared, the muted footsteps of maids passing through the corridors, even the faint ticking of the French clock above the mantel. All of it felt sharper, louder, as though the world had decided to make noise only where he least wished to hear it. The tension he carried was invisible to everyone but himself, buried beneath the immaculate surface of a man who had spent his entire life mastering the art of emotional concealment. Helena's final whispered words lingered with him far longer than he cared to admit. "It is the silence between us." He repeated those words in his mind as he crossed the long gallery, his steps echoing against marble tiles. The portraits of Montgomery ancestors watched him with familiar severity. Dukes, duchesses, generals, women with eyes sharper than their jewels. They seemed to judge him now, silently accusing him of failing in the only task that truly mattered. He stopped before the portrait of his father, the 7th Duke of Ravenshire, a towering figure even in paint. Alistair's spine straightened involuntarily, as though old instincts were being summoned. "I am not failing," he muttered under his breath, but the words sounded hollow the moment they left him. His father had always insisted that vulnerability was a flaw unworthy of their lineage. Montgomery men do not yield to sentiment, Alistair. They command it. And the boy he once was, young, impressionable, eager to earn the approval of a man who seldom praised, had internalized every syllable. But none of those teachings had prepared him for Helena. Nothing in his upbringing had warned him about the particular ache of seeing a wife move with quiet grace around the home, but never toward him. Nothing had told him what to do when her eyes held warmth for others, yet caution for him. Nothing had prepared him for the peculiar pain that came with her polite distance, because polite it always was, never rude, never cruel, just resigned. It was that resignation that unnerved him most, and so he found himself wandering not intentionally, but driven by something restless inside him. He eventually ended up in the West Wing, one he seldom visited unless duty required it. The rooms here were rarely used now, yet they bore the faint, unshakable memory of someone he had tried for years not to think about. Charlotte Harland. He paused outside the music room, fingers grazing the doorknob out of an old automatic habit. The scent of polished wood drifted through the gap beneath the door, and the echo of another life whispered back to him. He could almost hear it. The faint melody of her violin, her laughter when she caught him lingering in the doorway, her playful reprimand. "You watch too much and say too little, Alistair." He closed his eyes. Too much of Charlotte lived in this room, too much of his old self, too much of a promise he had never been able to keep. When she died, when illness took her swiftly, mercilessly, he had broken in a way he had sworn no one would ever see. And what frightened him was not the pain of losing her, but the depth of it. The terrifying way it had hollowed him out, made him unable to breathe without thinking of her. He had vowed never again. Never again to give anyone the power to destroy him. Never again to feel so deeply that the world could collapse if they left. Marriage, then, had seemed simple, safe, controlled. Helena had not been Charlotte. He had made sure of it. He had kept her at a distance because if he let her close, if he allowed the smallest possibility of affection, everything he had built to protect himself would crumble. Yet last night, watching her blush faintly at Sebastian's words, something within him had cracked, if only for a heartbeat. He hated that the crack was still there. Alistair opened the music room door slowly, his breath catching despite himself. The room smelled of dust and memories. A white sheet draped over the violin stand, like a ghost of the past. On the far wall hung a single sketch, Charlotte at 19, drawn by an artist who had captured her smile with painful precision. He stepped closer, compelled by something he could neither name nor refuse. She had been radiant, full of life, so certain he would one day let her in completely. But he never had, not the way she had wanted. Even then he had held back, held everything back, and Charlotte had died believing he was simply a reserved man, not that he was a man. Afraid of the depth of his own emotion, he dragged a hand across his face, suddenly exhausted by the weight of memory. Helena's quiet voice echoed faintly in his mind. "It is the silence between us." He exhaled sharply, anger rising, not at Helena, not even at Sebastian, but at himself. He had created the silence. He had built a marriage on caution rather than connection, and now he was startled that she felt alone. He turned away from Charlotte's portrait, shutting the door more forcefully than intended. He needed the grounds, the air, distance from ghosts. Outside, Ravenshire spread before him in sweeping green plains, broken only by hedgerows and grazing horses. The rain had softened into a mist, and the scent of wet earth filled the air. He walked quickly, his boots striking the gravel path with purpose. He needed clarity, or so he told himself. He reached the stables, expecting them to be quiet at this hour, but to his surprise, one of the stable boys bowed hastily and stepped aside. As Alistair entered, and there she was, Helena, still in her riding habit, though now dry, speaking softly to her mare Willow. She had always been gentle with animals, more gentle perhaps than she could allow herself to be with people. She stroked the horse's neck with a tenderness that pulled at something deep within him. He froze. She looked peaceful here, in a way she seldom looked inside the house. Her posture relaxed, her expression unguarded. She murmured something to the horse that he could not hear, but Willow nickered in response. A strange sensation swept through him, something close to envy. He envied the ease with which she offered affection to everything except her own husband. Before he could move, Helena turned and noticed him. Her eyes widened slightly in surprise, then she dipped her head politely. "Your Grace." He cleared his throat. He never cleared his throat. "Lady Ravenshire." Silence stretched between them, taut and fragile. She waited respectfully for him to speak, the way a duchess was expected to, but he found himself oddly uncertain. She finally broke the silence. "Is there something you wish to discuss?" Her tone was careful, measured in a way that made his chest tighten. He glanced briefly at the stable boy, who immediately hurried out, leaving them alone. Alistair stepped forward, but only slightly. "About last night," she gave a faint, almost imperceptible smile, though it held no amusement. "I told you, Your Grace. Lord Ashcombe's—" Compliment meant nothing. He stiffened. "I did not bring it up because of jealousy." Her brows lifted ever so slightly. "Did you not?" The question struck him harder than her silence had earlier. Her tone was not mocking, but sincerely curious, an inquiry that forced him to confront something he had hoped to ignore. "No," he said too quickly. Helena looked away, her hand resting lightly on Willow's mane. "Then why did you grip my waist, as if I might be taken from you?" The air left his lungs. He remembered the moment vividly, the ballroom lights, Sebastian leaning in, Helena's startled blush, his own hand finding her waist in an instinct he had not allowed himself in years. He had acted without thinking, without caution, without the armor of self-control. And she had noticed. Helena always noticed more than she allowed him to realize. He forced his expression back into neutrality. "It was crowded," he said, knowing the excuse was weak. Helena turned back to him, and there was something new in her gaze, not accusation, not softness, but a quiet understanding that unsettled him more than anything else could have. "You do not need to protect me from a crowded ballroom, Alistair." The use of his first name, rare, delicate, unexpected, sent a jarring sensation through him. She seldom spoke it, he seldom invited it. He swallowed. She continued, her voice low. "You only hold me when you are afraid." He looked away. The truth of it cut deeper than any blade. Helena did not push further. She stepped back, resting her hand lightly on Willow's neck. "I will not intrude again," she said softly. "I know you prefer the silence. I only wished to understand whether it is something you choose or something you fear." He felt the words like a strike to the chest. Before he could form a response, before he could summon the courage or the pride or whatever fragile defense he normally relied upon, she curtsied. "Good day, Your Grace." And then she left the stables. He watched her walk away, every step feeling like another inch of distance he had created, and did not know how to reclaim. For a long moment, Alistair remained completely still. Then, when he finally exhaled, he realized Helena had not wounded him. She had exposed a wound that had never healed, and for the first time in years, the Duke of Ravensshire felt the past inch closer, threatening to break through the walls he had built around his heart. The following days unfolded with a deceptive calm that only served to heighten the tension simmering beneath the surface of Ravenshire. Alistair carried himself with his usual composure, But the servants noticed, quietly, discreetly, a certain sharpness to his movements, a restlessness in the way he paced his study, the way he dismissed footmen with a mere flick of his hand. Helena, for her part, moved through the house with measured grace, fulfilling her duties flawlessly, yet offering her husband nothing beyond what etiquette strictly required. Their marriage had always been quiet, but this new quiet was different. This one had edges. Alistair felt them every time she entered a room and greeted him with a polite dip of the head instead of the soft, uncertain smile she used to give him. He felt them in her silence at dinner, in the way she kept her gaze lowered when he spoke, in the faint stiffness of her posture whenever he stepped too close. He had caused it. He knew that, and yet he did not know how to undo it, not without tearing down the barricades he had spent years constructing. On the fourth afternoon since their exchange in the stables, a letter arrived. It bore the crest of Viscount Ashcombe. Alistair's entire body went rigid. He opened it with the precision of a man defusing an explosive. "Your Grace, it is with great pleasure that the Viscount and Viscountess Ashcombe extend an invitation to you and the Duchess of Ravenshire to attend a gathering at Ashcombe House this Friday evening." His jaw tightened. A gathering, hosted by Sebastian's family. He read the rest of the elegant script through clenched teeth. When he reached Helena's name, the Duchess of Ravenshire, whose presence will be most welcome, a flicker of something ugly twisted in his chest. Sebastian had no right to welcome Helena anywhere. He set the letter down, calmly, deliberately. Then he stood still for a long time, staring at the unreadable pattern of the rug, as though it might contain answers to questions he refused to articulate. A knock sounded at the door. "Your Grace?" It was Mrs. Harbury, Helena's lady's maid, a woman of sharp senses and discreet observation, too discreet in his opinion. "Yes? Her Grace asked me to inform you that she will be going to the village this afternoon to assist with preparations for the spring charity fair. She thought you should be made aware." Alistair's brow furrowed. "She is going alone?" "No, Your Grace. Lord Ashcombe is already in the village. He offered his assistance to the vicar and—" Alistair didn't hear the rest. He heard Lord Ashcombe and Helena in the same sentence, and a bright, icy thread of jealousy slid down his spine. He dismissed the maid with a curt nod. After she left, he sank slowly into his leather chair, refusing to acknowledge the emotion tightening his chest. But jealousy didn't need acknowledgement. It existed regardless. Helena had not intended to return late, but the charity committee meeting had gone longer than expected. The sun had dipped behind the hills, the sky glowing faintly pink as her carriage turned onto the path leading to Ravenshire House. She stepped down gracefully, gathering her skirts, unaware that Alistair himself stood in the shadow of the door, watching her. When she finally noticed him, she paused. Her eyes flickered, not with fear, not with affection, but with a guarded neutrality he despised seeing on her face. "Good evening, Your Grace." He nodded stiffly. "You returned later than anticipated." "The preparations took longer. The fair is in 2 days and there was much to coordinate." He hesitated, a dangerous question pressed at his throat. "Was Lord Ashcombe assisting you?" She blinked, not in surprise but in caution. "Yes, he offered to help with transporting the donations from the hall." Alistair's jaw tightened. Helena noticed. She did not mention it. She never mentioned his reactions anymore. Instead, she lifted her chin with quiet composure. It was kind of him. Alistair felt a heat rise beneath his skin. Kind. Kind was a word Helena had never used to describe him. He stepped closer, not enough to be inappropriate, but enough to make her breath catch almost imperceptibly. "Kindness can be mistaken for familiarity," he said coldly. Helena's brow softened with polite confusion. "I do not understand. You allowed him to escort you through the village?" Her lips parted slightly. "He is an old friend, Your Grace. I saw no harm in it." His voice turned low, quiet, and dangerous in its restraint. "There is harm when another man feels comfortable enough to call my wife beautiful." Her breath stilled. The air between them grew tense, as though every unspoken emotion of the past 3 years had risen to the surface. Helena's voice, when it came, was soft but steady. "You are speaking of something that offended you, not something that offended me." The truth of it hit him like a blade. Before he could respond, a footman opened the door, unaware of the storm unfolding. Helena curtsied with perfect composure and stepped inside, and Alistair, standing alone on the front steps, realized with unwelcome clarity that jealousy had its own kind of humiliation. The following evening, Ravenshire House hosted a small dinner for neighbouring families. It had been arranged weeks earlier, Helena's suggestion, which he had approved without much interest at the time. Now, however, the thought of hosting anyone while his marriage felt as fragile as crystal irritated him. The guests arrived gradually, carriages pulling up one by one under lanterns glowing against the night. Music drifted softly from the drawing room. The air smelled of lavender polish and warm spice from the kitchen. Helena greeted guests with flawless grace. Alistair stood beside her, offering polite nods, his hand never straying near hers, though he noticed everything, every gesture she made, every smile she offered, every glance that passed between her and those around them. And then Lord Sebastian Ashcombe walked in. Alistair felt the shift instantly. Sebastian strode into the drawing room with the quiet confidence of a man who had spent his life being admired. He bowed to Helena with warm familiarity, and she dipped her head in return, though her smile was restrained, more restrained than the one she had offered him the night of the ball. But Sebastian noticed none of that. Men like him seldom noticed subtle refusals. He only saw Helena's beauty, and Alistair saw him. See it. Jealousy settled in the Duke's stomach like burning coal. They moved to the dining hall where the long table gleamed with crystal, silver and candlelight. Helena was seated across from Alistair as propriety dictated. Sebastian sat beside her. Alistair's hands curled beneath the tablecloth. He watched as Sebastian leaned slightly toward Helena, speaking about some memory from their youth in Sussex. Helena listened politely, offering faint smiles, contributing when necessary. But Alistair saw it. He saw the softness she was trying to suppress, the familiarity she wished she did not feel. She was not encouraging Sebastian, but she had once trusted him. That alone was enough to make the Duke quietly unravel. He gripped his wineglass too tightly. The candlelight flickered across Helena's face, illuminating the delicate curve of her cheek, the softness of her gaze as she nodded to something Sebastian said. Alistair felt something dangerous rising, deep, old, terrifying. He barely heard the conversation around him, other guests discussing the spring season in London, the improvements to the road through Wiltshire, the health of Lady Pembroke's roses. All of it was a blur. His eyes were fixed solely on Helena, and on the way Sebastian's gaze lingered on her for a moment too long. Finally, Helena looked up, accidentally meeting Alistair's eyes from across the table. For a moment, the world stilled, her expression faltered, and something unspoken passed between them. Not affection, not apology, but a question Alistair refused to answer. After dinner, guests moved to the drawing room for music. A young woman played the pianoforte softly, her notes floating through the candlelit air. Helena stood near the French doors speaking to Lady Pembroke. Alistair watched her from across the room, compelled by something he could neither articulate nor stop. Sebastian approached her again. Alistair felt it like a physical blow. Sebastian bowed slightly. "Lady Ravenshire, would you honour me with a short walk in the garden? The night air is quite pleasant." Helena hesitated. She glanced, not consciously, not intentionally, toward Alistair. The Duke straightened. Every instinct in his body awakened. Sebastian noticed her glance and followed it. When his eyes met the Duke's, something smug flickered there. A challenge. Alistair stepped forward. He did not raise his voice. He did not break decorum. He did not act the jealous husband. He acted like a Duke. "Lady Ravenshire will not be taking the night air," he said calmly. "The ground is still damp from last night's rain." Sebastian's smile tightened. Helena lowered her gaze, understanding the refusal was not truly hers to give. The tension in the room shifted, subtly but undeniably. Sebastian bowed stiffly. "Of course, Your Grace. I defer to your judgment." He left them, though not without one last glance at Helena. When he was gone, Helena finally looked up at her husband. Her eyes were not angry, nor resentful. They were sad. "You need not shield me from him," she said quietly. "I am shielding you from impropriety," he replied, "or from jealousy." The words were soft enough to be mistaken for breath, but they were heard. Alistair felt every wall he had built tighten around him, trapping him in a prison of his own making. He drew a slow, careful breath. A duke does not concern himself with jealousy. Helena studied him with heartbreaking calm. But a man might. Her voice trembled only slightly. She turned, intending to leave the room. But before she could take a single step, a truth hit him with staggering clarity. He was losing her. Not to Sebastian, not to another man, but to the silence he himself had created. His pride locked the words in his throat. Helena walked away, the candlelight catching the glimmer of emotion she tried to hide. And Alistair Montgomery, Duke of Ravenshire, stood alone in a room full of people, jealous, unmoored, and more, afraid of losing his wife than he had ever been of love. The morning after the disastrous dinner felt unusually heavy inside Ravenshire House. A storm had crept in overnight, turning the sky a muted slate, thick with unfallen rain. The atmosphere inside the house mirrored the tension between its two inhabitants, silent, suspended, waiting for the inevitable fracture. Alistair woke earlier than usual, but sleep had been no companion. Every time he had closed his eyes, the same images returned. Sebastian standing far too close to Helena. Helena's brief glance toward him at the table. Her quiet words, "A man might." And worst of all, the sadness in her gaze when she looked at him in the drawing room, as though she were mourning something long dead. He dressed with mechanical precision, choosing a darker coat than usual, something that suited the unsettled feeling clawing inside his chest. Pride told him he was in control. His heart insisted the opposite. On his way down the corridor, he heard soft voices near the morning room. One belonged to Helena. The other belonged to Mrs. Harbury, her lady's maid. He stopped, not intentionally, but because the sound of Helena's voice had become something his body reacted to before his mind did. "I do not think he wishes to speak to me," Helena said quietly. Alistair felt the words like a blow. Mrs. Harbury replied in a soothing tone, "His Grace is a complicated man, my lady. He rarely shows what he feels." Helena let out a small, humorless laugh. "He rarely feels what he shows." A pause, then softer. "And when he does feel, he only expresses it in anger." Alistair's breath caught. He had heard enough, more than enough. He turned away, retreating before they could sense him. Pride burned through him in a hot, humiliating wave. He should speak to her, but every time he considered it, something inside him locked tight, like a door he could not open. Instead, he retreated to his study, telling himself he needed space, distance, clarity. But the truth was simpler. He did not know how to be around her when she was hurting because of him, and that terrified him. It was nearly noon when Helena appeared at his study door. She knocked softly before entering, always polite, always careful not to intrude. Her gown was a soft grey blue, simple yet elegant, matching the somber light of the day. Her hair was pinned in a modest twist, though a few strands had loosened, giving her an almost fragile appearance. "Your Grace," she said formally, "may I speak with you?" He looked up, forcing his voice steady. "Of course." She stepped inside and closed the door gently before approaching the center of the room. "I wish to apologize," she began. The words shocked him so thoroughly that he actually stood. "Apologize?" he repeated. "For what?" She kept her gaze lowered. "For causing discomfort last night. For allowing Lord Ashcombe to monopolize my attention. For—" Her voice caught slightly. She steadied herself. "For giving the impression that I welcomed it." His chest tightened painfully. Helena was apologizing for his jealousy, for his failure, but instead of relief, something dark and defensive surged within him. Pride, fear, old habits. "There is no need to apologize," he said, but his tone was cool, too cool. "It was not your conduct that troubled me." She looked up at him, eyes searching. "Then what was it?" He went still. To answer her honestly would require vulnerability. To answer dishonestly would wound her. He chose the worst option of all. He avoided the answer. He walked past her toward his desk, needing distance. "The matter does not warrant discussion." Helena remained where she was, her hands tightening around each other. "It does warrant discussion," she said softly. "If there is something I have done to earn your displeasure, I should know." Her voice trembled, but only slightly. Helena was stronger than she appeared, strong enough to endure a marriage. Where affection was rationed like a scarce commodity, he closed his eyes briefly, battling the pressure inside him. "You have done nothing," he forced out. "It is simply unnecessary familiarity from Lord Ashcombe. He is a friend. He is presumptuous." Her lips parted in surprise. "Presumptuous? For speaking kindly, for addressing me with warmth." Warmth. The word felt like a knife. He turned sharply toward her. A married woman should not encourage such familiarity. Her eyes widened with hurt. "Encourage it? I did nothing of the sort. Your manner suggested otherwise." She drew in a quiet breath, absorbing the blow. "I see." Her voice was barely audible. Alistair felt something inside him twist. Guilt, longing, pride, fear. But pride was faster. He added coldly, "And it is not appropriate for you to walk with him alone in the village." Helena flinched. A subtle movement, but noticeable. Devastating. "You truly believe," she whispered, "that I would betray the honor of this marriage?" Her voice cracked on the last word. Alistair's restraint faltered. His mouth opened. Perhaps to deny it, perhaps to apologize, he wasn't sure. But old wounds and old fears surged first. "I believe a woman may be unaware when her conduct invites speculation." The moment he said it, he regretted it. Helena's face went pale, not with anger but with heartbreak. A tear did not fall. A sob did not escape. Helena did not shout. Her voice was steady, quiet, and final. "I have never been unaware of anything in this marriage, Your Grace, least of all the distance you insist upon keeping." The silence that followed was suffocating. She adjusted her gloves with a trembling hand. "Forgive me for troubling you." She curtsied, and then she left the study. The door closed gently behind her. Alistair stood frozen, breath shallow, shock radiating outward through his limbs. He had broken something. Not with force, not with anger, with fear, with silence, with the exact weapon he had used against himself for years. Helena did not appear for luncheon, nor for afternoon tea, nor for dinner. She sent her regrets each time through a servant, always polite, always respectful, always distant. By the time night fell, Ravenshire House had never felt so large, so cold. Alistair walked through the corridors like a ghost haunting his own home. Pride insisted he let her be, that it was better to keep order, distance, decorum. But each closed door he passed felt like another reminder of his failure. He ended up outside Helena's sitting room, hand half raised to knock before stopping himself. He turned away. A cowardly retreat. He spent the night in the study, staring at the dying fire until dawn. Helena awoke early. She bathed, dressed quietly, and instructed Mrs. Harbury to prepare her travel trunk. The maid hesitated. "My lady, will you be away long?" Helena forced a small smile. "I do not know." Alistair was in the breakfast room when he heard the unmistakable sound of a trunk being carried down the stairs. He rose instantly. A cold, visceral dread swept through him. He left the room without a word and reached the foyer just as Helena descended the staircase, cloak draped over her arm, bonnet in hand. His heart slammed against his ribs. "You are leaving?" he demanded, the veneer of calm cracking. She stopped at the bottom step, meeting his eyes with heartbreaking serenity. "I am going to stay with my aunt in Bath for a time." He felt the floor tilt beneath him. For what purpose? For peace. The word cut deeper than any argument could have. He stepped forward instinctively. "Helena." She held up a hand, not rudely, not angrily, just finished. "I will not be where I am not wanted, nor where my presence is only cause for suspicion." He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. She continued, voice calm but full of resignation. "You need not fear impropriety. I promised to honor you as my husband, and I have. But I will not remain where my every breath is interpreted as a mistake." The last sentence broke him, truly broke him. For the first time in years, Alistair felt emotions surge with violent force, guilt, fear, longing. So intense, he nearly reached out to her, nearly. But pride, the one enemy he never conquered, whispered its familiar poison. "If you show that you need her, she will see your weakness." Helena watched the war on his face. She waited. Just a moment. A moment where she hoped, prayed, he would ask her to stay. He did not. She exhaled softly. "Goodbye, Your Grace," and she turned away. The carriage door closed. The horses began to move. Alistair stood in the open doorway, drenched in the cold morning air, watching the carriage grow smaller along the long gravel drive. He did not move. He did not call out. He simply watched the woman he cared for, more than he dared admit, disappear into the mist. The moment she vanished from view, the realization struck him with the force of a blow. He had driven her away. He had done this. He had broken them. Not Sebastian, not society, not circumstance. He had broken his marriage with his silence and his fear. For the first time since he was 19, the Duke of Ravenshire sank to his knees, and he was alone, utterly, irreversibly, alone. It rained the entire first day Helena was gone. A slow, relentless rain that drummed against the windows and soaked the grounds of Ravenshire until the earth itself seemed to sag beneath the weight of it. The sky hung low and grey, and the house, once merely quiet, now felt cavernous and vacant, every corridor echoing with a silence far more brutal than any argument could have been. Alistair scarcely left his study. The servants whispered among themselves in the hallways, exchanging glances they hoped he would not notice. They had cared deeply for Helena, far more deeply than they dared express, and her sudden departure had cast a pall over the entire estate. But none felt the loss more viciously than the Duke. He remained rigid in his chair, staring at the dying embers of the fireplace. His thoughts moved in circles, returning again and again to the same unbearable truth. He had let her go. He had watched her walk away with a calm expression that had shattered the moment she disappeared down the drive. He had allowed his fear, his pride, and the ghost of a promise made long ago to dictate his actions. And now, the emptiness gnawing at his chest was something he could neither contain nor ignore. He had known loneliness. He had known grief. He had known the hollow ache of losing someone he cared for. But this was different. This was a wound he had inflicted upon himself. The rain continued well into the evening, and still he did not move. He remained in the same chair, his jaw clenched, his breath shallow, his hands curled so tightly that his knuckles were white. When Mr. Rowley entered quietly with a tray, tea untouched, dinner uneaten, the butler hesitated. "Your Grace. Perhaps a warm meal would settle your stomach." Alistair did not look at him. "I am not hungry." Mr. Rowley nodded, though his eyes softened with an emotion rarely shown in front of the Duke: sympathy. Before leaving, he paused. "If I may say so, Your Grace, forgiveness is only possible while the person is still willing to listen." Alistair's breath hitched. It took all of his self-control not to reveal how deeply the words struck him. When the door closed, he finally let his head fall into his hands. He had always believed silence protected him. Now it was destroying him. The next morning brought no relief. The sun struggled to break through a fog so thick it clung to the windows like a veil. At breakfast, a place had been set for Helena as usual. Mr. Rowley had tried to maintain the household routine, but Alistair could not bear the sight of it. He dismissed the food immediately. He attempted to work, correspondence, estate matters, parliamentary reports, but the words blurred on the page. Every line he read dissolved into memories. Helena laughing softly with the gardener's children, Helena tending to the roses, Helena looking out the window at dusk, with a longing she thought he did not see. He had seen. He had simply refused to face it. By afternoon he no longer pretended to occupy himself. He found himself in the music room, Charlotte's room, the place he always went when he wished to feel nothing. But now even that sanctuary betrayed him. He stood before the covered violin stand. In his youth he had believed loss was a fixed thing, one tragedy endured, never repeated, as though the heart could only shatter once. He had been wrong. Helena's absence felt different from Charlotte's loss, not because it hurt less, but because he was the architect of it, because she had left not due to fate, not due to illness, but due to a pain he had inflicted. He sank onto the piano bench, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped before him. He whispered, "To no one in particular, what have I done?" The answer echoed back in the empty room: everything. The third day arrived with the first letter, a short note from Helena, no more than a few lines. Your Grace, I have arrived safely in Bath. My aunt sends her regards. I shall write again once I have settled fully. Respectfully, Helena Montgomery, respectfully. The word gutted him. He read the letter dozens of times, fingers trembling slightly each time he folded it back into its envelope. The writing was neat, composed, distant. There was no anger in it, but there was no warmth either. It was the letter of a stranger. He spent the rest of the day in a haze, pacing the long corridor of portraits. The faces of Montgomery generations stared down at him. Stern, unyielding, judgmental. He imagined what they would say. A duke does not reveal his feelings, Alistair. A duke does not need affection. A duke does not bend. But for the first time in his life, he questioned every rule he had been taught. What use? Was pride if the cost was losing the only person who had ever looked at him without fear or ambition? What use was dignity if it built walls so tall that even his wife could not reach him? When night fell, he remained awake long after the candles had burned low, his thoughts restless and relentless. He replayed every moment of their marriage, not the formal dinners or public appearances, but the small, fleeting instances he had refused to acknowledge. The soft smile she gave him when he returned, late from London, the hope in her eyes the night she asked if he would accompany her on a walk, the slight tremble in her voice the first time she called him Alistair, the sadness that deepened each time he failed to respond. He had not realized how much she had tried, how much she had given of herself, how much she had hoped, and he had repaid her with distance, silence, fear disguised as indifference. He rose abruptly, unable to sit still any longer. He needed to write to her, immediately. He returned to his study, lit a candle and sat before the blank page. But the moment the quill touched the parchment, he froze. What could he say? Forgive me? I was wrong? I miss you? The words felt too bare, too raw, too dangerous. He set the quill down. He tried again an hour later, and again. Each attempt ended the same way, with ink blots staining the paper and the weight of pride pressing against his throat like an iron collar. By dawn, he still had not written a single line. On the fourth day he rode to the village, not for business, not for any logical reason, but because he needed movement, distraction, anything to quiet the chaos inside him. He had not expected to run into Lord Sebastian Ashcombe, but fate seemed determined to pry old wounds open. Sebastian stood outside the vicarage speaking with the curate. When he noticed Alistair approaching, he straightened, offering a polite, overly formal bow. Your Grace. Alistair nodded stiffly. He had no interest in conversation, certainly not with the man whose presence had sparked the worst moment of his marriage. But Sebastian, either oblivious or intentionally provoking him, stepped forward. I hear Lady Ravenshire has travelled to Bath. Alistair's jaw clenched. Her plans are of no concern to you. Sebastian's smile faded. I meant no disrespect. Silence stretched between them. The village street seemed painfully still. Sebastian shifted. She looked unhappy the evening of your dinner. Alistair's eyes hardened. You presume too much. But Sebastian did not back away. He spoke quietly, without arrogance this time. She is a woman deserving of gentleness, Your Grace. I hope you know that. Something inside Alistair snapped, softly, quietly, but unmistakably. He did not strike the man. He did not raise his voice. He did not break decorum. But his words turned to ice. You will not speak of my wife again. Sebastian held his gaze for a long moment, then inclined his head. As you wish. He walked away. Alistair's hands shook as he gripped the reins of his horse, not with rage, with shame, because even a man he disliked had seen her pain. When he returned to Ravenshire, another letter was waiting. Short, polite, distant. Your Grace, I am settling in comfortably. The air in Bath is restorative and my aunt is most accommodating. I trust Ravenshire is well. Respectfully, H. Montgomery, H. Montgomery. Not Helena, not your wife. Just initials. He sank into his chair. He read the letter. Over and over until the edges softened beneath his fingertips. At last, something broke inside him. Not a violent shattering, but a quiet collapse, like a structure crumbling under its own weight. He whispered into the empty room, "Helena, I need you." The words were foreign, terrifying, liberating. He rose slowly, went to his desk, and finally began to write. He did not craft his sentences. He did not censor himself. He wrote what he felt, raw and unpolished. "Helena, I find myself unable to rest since you left. The silence here has become unbearable. I did not understand the depth of what I had until I drove it away. I have been a coward, hiding behind pride and old wounds that should have healed long ago. If you can find it in your heart to return, I will try, God help me, I will try, to be the man you hoped I might become. Yours, Alistair." He stared at the letter long after the ink dried. Would it be enough? He did not know, but it was the first truth he had spoken. On paper in years, he sealed it, he sent it, and then he waited. Hours passed. Days. No response came. Ravenshire grew darker with each sunrise, as though the house itself mourned her absence. On the seventh night, Alistair stood at the balcony overlooking the grounds, the evening mist brushing against him. He had not eaten properly. He had not slept for more than a few hours at a time. Every sound at the door made his stomach lurch with hope, only to crumble into disappointment. He whispered her name into the cold air, even though no one could hear it. He finally understood. He was not afraid of love. He was afraid of loving her and losing her, but she was already lost. Unless he did something more than write letters, something more than wait, something he had sworn never to do. He needed to go after her. He needed to fight for her. For the first time, action, not silence, would save him. And with that realization, the Duke of Ravenshire made his decision. He would go to Bath. He would bring his wife home, not by command, not by right, but by earning her forgiveness, by proving he had finally learned to speak the truth his heart had always known. For a man known for his unwavering composure, Alistair Montgomery had never moved with such urgency in his life. On the morning he resolved to go to Bath, the entire household fell into a state of hushed astonishment. The Duke was not a man prone to sudden decisions, or any decisions that revealed emotion, but this journey was fueled, not by duty, not by society's expectations, not even by logic. It was fueled by fear and longing, and something he had denied for so long that it now threatened to rupture through every defense he had ever built. He departed Ravenshire at first light. The sky was pale, streaked with dawn's early grey, and the air held the crisp chill of early spring. His horse was saddled before most of the staff had even risen, and Mr. Rowley himself stood at the entrance, watching as Alistair mounted. "Safe." "Travels, Your Grace," the butler said quietly. Alistair merely nodded, but Rowley added even softer, "Bring her home, sir." Those words clung to him as he rode away. The journey to Bath took hours, long, restless, torturous hours. Each mile brought a new wave of doubt. Would Helena receive him? Would she read his letter and see sincerity, not desperation? Would she look at him with anger, or worse, indifference? He replayed every moment of their marriage as the countryside blurred past him, the nights he left her to dine alone, the mornings he offered only curt nods instead of conversation, the moments when she had reached out, tentatively, bravely, only to be met with a wall of cold restraint. "I will not be where I am not wanted." Her voice haunted him. He had wanted her. He had always wanted her. But wanting and allowing himself to feel were not the same. His heart had been locked long before Helena entered his life, and he had not known how to open it. He had never been taught. He had never been encouraged. But Helena had tried. She had tried so many times he could now list every attempt with painful clarity. When she asked if he enjoyed music, when she invited him for a walk through the gardens, when she reached for his hand during a storm, when she called him Alistair for the first time. He had refused her every time, not intentionally, not cruelly, but out of fear. Fear that loving again meant losing again. By the time he reached Bath, the sky had begun to clear. Sunlight filtered through the clouds, casting a soft glow over the city's elegant stone buildings. Carriages lined the streets. Ladies in pastel gowns walked with parasols, and laughter drifted from shop fronts. Bath was everything Helena deserved. Warm, social, gentle. He dismounted at the townhouse belonging to Helena's aunt, Lady Trevelyan. a formidable widow known for her keen judgment and sharper tongue. If Helena had confided in her, as she likely had, the odds of a warm reception were slim. Alistair drew a breath, squared his shoulders and knocked. The butler opened the door. His expression froze the moment he recognized the Duke. "Your Grace." His bow was stiff. "Lady Trevelyan is at home. I shall inform her of your arrival." He was led to a drawing room decorated in soft blue and gold. A harp stood near the window. A vase of early spring flowers, snowdrops, primroses, sat on a small table. Helena loved snowdrops. He reached out to touch one, but stopped himself. He did not deserve to. Touch anything she loved. Lady Trevelyan entered a few minutes later. She was tall, silver-haired, elegantly dressed, and possessed an expression that made even powerful men choose their words carefully. "Your Grace," she greeted coolly. "This is unexpected." Alistair bowed. "Lady Trevelyan, I thank you for receiving me." "I had little choice," she replied, seating herself with deliberate poise. "One does not leave a duke waiting on the doorstep." Her tone made it clear she would not offer him more courtesy than that. Alistair remained standing. "I have come to speak with my wife." Her eyes sharpened. "And after 3 years, what sudden revelation brings you to Bath?" He swallowed. "A letter unanswered." Lady Trevelyan lifted a brow. Helena did not believe a response was required. The floor beneath him felt unsteady. "I must see her," he said quietly. "Please." For a brief moment, sympathy flickered in the older woman's eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "I will allow it, but only because Helena is kind and deserves closure, whichever form that may take." Closure. The word struck him with a force that nearly made him stagger. He had not considered that Helena might not wish to return. He had not let the possibility form a complete thought, but now the possibility consumed him. He forced himself to remain composed. "Thank you," he said, voice low. Lady Trevelyan summoned the maid. "Inform her Grace that the Duke has arrived, and requests an audience." The maid left. Alistair's hands curled behind his back, an idle stance for most, but a lifeline for him. Minutes stretched into hours, not literally, but long enough that every breath felt tight, every second unforgiving. At last, Helena entered. She wore a soft cream dress, simple in cut, her hair gathered in a loose chignon. She looked rested, though there was a sadness in her eyes that had not been there when she left Ravenshire. She stopped in the doorway. Alistair forgot how to breathe. She looked fragile and stronger than he remembered, both at once. She curtsied. "Your Grace." Formality, distance, a title instead of a name. He bowed. "Helena." Her breath caught, but only for a moment. Lady Trevelyan excused herself, leaving them alone. Alistair stepped forward. "I received no reply to my letter." Her gaze dropped briefly to the carpet. "It did not require one." He swallowed hard. "I asked you to return." She looked up, and the pain in her eyes made him feel as though he were being split open. "You did not ask me to stay when I stood before you with my trunk." He exhaled as if she had struck him. She continued gently, too gently. "You asked only after I left." He took another step toward her. She did not retreat, but she did not soften. "Helena, I have made countless mistakes. I have hurt you. I have let my past dictate my present." His jaw tightened, emotion burning in his voice. "I drove you away. I admit it, and I regret it more than I have ever regretted anything in my life." She looked away. "Regret is not the same as change." Her words sliced cleanly through him. He ran a hand over his face, an uncharacteristic sign of distress. "I do not know how to be the man you deserve." Her eyes shimmered, but no tears fell. "Then perhaps you should not have married." It was not cruel. It was honest. The kind of honesty he had denied her for years. He stepped closer again, now dangerously near, but still she did not. "Move your—" "I cannot lose you," he said, voice almost breaking. "Helena, I cannot—" She finally stepped back, not in fear, but in quiet, resolute self-protection. "You already did." The words hit him like a blade to the chest. For a moment he could not speak. He could scarcely stand. Helena continued, calmer now. "I needed partnership. I needed respect. I needed—" Something more than silence and suspicion. She paused. I needed a husband who saw me. He felt the weight of every unspoken emotion he had kept locked inside, every choice made in self-preservation, every moment he had allowed fear to win. He lowered his head. You deserved all of that, and you gave me none of it. He flinched at her quiet accuracy. A long silence stretched. Finally, Helena let out a slow breath. I am not prepared to return to Ravenshire. Alistair looked up sharply. Helena, I need time. He stepped forward. Time without me. She held his gaze. Time where you are not the only one deciding the terms of our marriage. He froze. She continued. If you truly wish to change, then you must prove it without expecting me to reward you immediately. Her voice trembled for the first time. I no longer trust your affection. He felt something inside him collapse. Still he nodded, slowly, painfully. Then I will earn your trust again. She blinked, startled, not by his words, but by the sincerity in them. He bowed his head, voice barely above a whisper. I will wait. As long as it takes. For a moment neither spoke. Then she stepped aside, giving him passage to leave. Their eyes met one last time. Her expression wounded, cautious, uncertain. His shattered, fearful, determined. He bowed, not as a duke, as a man begging silently for forgiveness he had not yet earned. And he left. Outside the air was cool. Alistair inhaled deeply, grounding himself. He had not regained her. He had been denied. He had been rejected, not cruelly, but firmly. But in that rejection, he had seen something he had not seen in years. Helena's strength, Helena's boundaries, Helena's refusal to be diminished. And it woke something inside him. Not fear, not despair, but resolve. For the first time, Alistair wanted to change, not to keep her, but because he could no longer bear being the man who hurt her. He mounted his horse. He looked back at the townhouse window, wondering if Helena watched. She did, hidden behind the curtain, her hand pressed lightly to the glass, her eyes glimmering with a single question. Will he change, or will he disappear again? Alistair whispered into the wind. I will prove it to you. He rode away, determination burning in every breath. But as he reached the edge of the city, a carriage turned sharply onto the road. He recognized the crest immediately. Lord Sebastian Ashcombe, heading straight for Helena. A chill swept through Alistair. The cliffhanger settled into place. He turned his horse around. Faster, harder. He would not allow Sebastian near her. Not now. Not when she was vulnerable. Not when she believed she had already lost her husband. Alistair galloped back toward Bath, and the storm inside him finally broke. Alistair had never known fear like this, not on battlefields, not at funerals, not even the day Charlotte died. This was a deeper, more intimate terror, woven not into the threat of loss itself, but in the realization that he had caused it, that the pain Helena carried had his name etched across it. And now, Sebastian Ashcombe, of all men, was on his way to her. Alistair urged his horse faster, the wind tearing past him as Bath's elegant streets blurred into streaks of grey stone and pale sunlight. His heartbeat thundered, not from the ride, but from the image of Helena opening the door and finding Sebastian standing there, offering warmth and familiarity that Alistair had denied her for years. He would not allow it, not because she belonged to him, but because Sebastian did not deserve her, and because Helena deserved a husband who finally fought for her. He reached Lady Trevelyan's townhouse as Sebastian's carriage rolled to a stop. Alistair dismounted before his horse had fully halted, barely aware of the startled gasps from passing pedestrians. Sebastian descended first. He looked immaculate, composed, irritatingly confident. Too confident. The moment their eyes met, Sebastian's brows raised ever so slightly. Your Grace, I had not expected to see you in Bath. Alistair's voice was low, controlled, dangerously controlled. You will not see Lady Ravenshire today. Sebastian blinked, his pleasant expression flickering. I beg your pardon? Alistair stepped forward, closing the distance between them. You will not see her, not now, not while she is vulnerable. Sebastian stiffened. I care for her well-being. You care for the idea of her, Alistair countered coldly. A memory from your youth. Do not mistake that for something you have any stake in now. The tension thickened. Sebastian's jaw tightened. She deserves kindness. Alistair's eyes darkened. She deserves her husband. For a long moment, the two men stood in taut silence, aristocratic restraint, barely containing the storm beneath. But Sebastian, sensing a battle he could not win, not today, slowly inclined his head. "As you wish, Your Grace." He returned to his carriage, but before stepping inside, he added softly, "Do not fail her again." The carriage pulled away. Alistair stood motionless, chest rising and falling in slow, controlled breaths. The confrontation had not been for show. It had been necessary. Now came the far more difficult task, facing Helena. Lady Trevelyan received him with an expression that revealed she had seen everything from the window. "Well," she said dryly, "that was unnecessarily dramatic." Alistair bowed slightly. "I do not apologize." "You never do," she replied. "But if you wish to speak to Helena again, you will do so with, humility. Not whatever that display was." He nodded once. Lady Trevelyan studied him for a long moment, reading him with unnerving accuracy. Finally, she said, "She is in the garden." He inhaled. Slowly, he stepped past her, walked through the narrow corridor and pushed open the back door. Sunlight filtered through branches overhead, scattering patterns across the gravel path. The garden was modest, smaller than Ravenshire's sprawling grounds, but beautifully kept. Snowdrops and primroses lined the paths, their delicate petals trembling in the breeze. Helena stood near the fountain, her back to him, her hands clasped before her. She wore a soft blue dress, the same color she had worn the night of the ball, and her hair was pinned loosely, as though she had dressed without much thought. For a moment he simply watched her. Every line of her posture was familiar. Every detail was dearer than he had ever allowed himself to admit. At last, he spoke. "Helena." She turned slowly. Her expression shifted. Surprise first, then caution, then something more guarded, something he feared was close to resignation. "Your Grace." He approached her, stopping a few feet away. Enough distance to respect her boundaries, enough closeness to show he had no intention of hiding. The silence stretched, long, painful, necessary. Finally Helena spoke, voice soft but steady. "You should not have confronted Sebastian." He exhaled. "I should not have allowed him to get close enough to think. He had the right." She looked away. "He has been a friend to me, a friend who wishes for more." She did not deny it. She simply shifted her gaze to the fountain, watching the ripples of water dance across the surface. Alistair felt something crack inside him. Quietly but irreparably, he stepped closer. "Helena," he said softly, "I am not here to speak of him." She turned back to him. Her eyes were clear, guarded, expecting little, prepared for disappointment. The realization nearly broke. "Him. I am here," he said, voice low and uneven, "to speak of us." She swallowed, but she did not move. He continued, each word a confession he had never believed himself capable of making. "The morning you left, I knew it was my doing. I knew it the moment your carriage disappeared into the fog. I have known it every hour since." Her brows drew together slightly. He drew a breath. "I have lived behind walls all my life. Walls I believed protected me, protected others, from who I was beneath them. But those walls have done nothing but imprison me, and wound you." Helena's breath trembled, though she fought to steady it. He stepped closer, slowly, allowing her to stop him if she wished. She did not. "I have been a coward," Alistair said quietly. "Afraid to love you, afraid to lose you, afraid to feel anything that might weaken the facade I was taught to wear." His voice tightened. "But I lost you anyway." Her eyes flickered. Pain, hope, fear. He continued, "The silence you spoke. Tove, I created it. Not because you did anything wrong, not because you were unworthy, but because I did not know how to be a husband." His throat constricted. "I know now." A faint breeze rustled the leaves above them. Helena finally spoke. "Words are easy, Your Grace." The softness in her voice made the words hurt more than anger ever could. He nodded. "Then allow me to prove it with actions." She hesitated. He took one more step, close enough for her to feel the sincerity radiating from him but not close enough to touch. Not yet. I will spend the rest of my life proving it if you let me. Her lips parted slightly, not in surprise, but in disbelief. She whispered, "Why now? Why only now?" He closed his eyes briefly. "Because watching you walk away was the first time I truly understood what losing you meant." He met her gaze, letting her see everything he had hidden. "Because I love you." The words hung in the air, fragile, final, irrevocable. Helena went still. Her breath caught. Her fingers trembled. She stared at him as though trying to determine whether the earth had shifted beneath her feet, or if she had imagined the confession entirely. He stepped forward, voice quiet but firm. "I love you, Helena. I have loved you in silence, in fear, behind every shield I built. I loved you even when I denied it to myself, and I will never, never make you question your worth again." A single tear slipped down her cheek, the first he had ever seen from her. She wiped it quickly as though embarrassed. He moved instinctively but stopped, his hands suspended between them. Helena stared at his outstretched hand as though it were both a promise and a danger. He withdrew it slowly, respectfully. "I will not touch you until you ask me to," he said softly. Her breath quivered. Silence enveloped the garden. Then, quietly, Helena whispered, "Why did you never say these things before?" He let out a long, shuddering breath. "Because I buried myself long before you came into my life," he swallowed. "And because you deserved a whole man, something I feared I could never be." She looked away, tears glistening. "I was so lonely," she confessed in a trembling voice, "so afraid I would spend my entire life beside a man who would never see me." His voice broke. "I see you now." She met his gaze. He held nothing back, no reserve, no pride, no distance, just truth. "You are the one thing I cannot, will not, lose." Helena inhaled sharply. For a moment, neither moved. Then she asked the question that mattered more than any other. "Do you truly believe you can change?" He took a slow breath. "I do not believe it." He stepped closer, closer still. "I choose it." Her lips parted, breath trembling. He searched her eyes. "And I will choose it every day." Helena closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, they were shining with tears and something else, something timid, fragile, but alive. Hope. A single step brought her closer, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her breath. Her voice was barely audible. "Alistair." His heart clenched. She continued softly, "If I return to Ravenshire, I cannot endure the man you once were." He nodded. "You will not have to." Another tear escaped her. He ached to wipe it, but he waited until she reached up, slow, hesitant, and placed her hand against his chest, right over his heart. His breath stilled. Her touch was feather-light, fragile, precious. "Then show me," she whispered. "Show me the man you wish to become." He covered her hand with his own, slowly, reverently, their first voluntary touch in months. His voice was unsteady. "I will." She looked up into his eyes, and in a breath of courage, gentle, trembling, fierce, she leaned into him just enough that her forehead brushed his. It was not a kiss. It was something deeper. Permission, recognition, a fragile return. He closed his eyes, exhaling as though a lifetime of tension had finally left him. "Helena," he murmured, "forgive me." Her whisper was soft against his skin. "Not yet." He nodded. "Acceptance. But you may hold me." His breath broke. Gently, carefully, he wrapped his arms around her, drawing her against him with a tenderness he had never allowed himself to feel. She melted into him, her hands gripping his coat, her tears soaking into his shoulder. He held her as though holding something sacred, and for the first time in his life, Alistair Montgomery understood what it meant to love without fear. When she finally pulled back, her eyes were red but clearer. "Take me home," she whispered. Emotion surged through him, raw, overwhelming, and impossibly beautiful. "Yes," he breathed. "Yes." Helena placed her hand in his, not as a duchess, not out of duty, but as a woman ready to try again. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it softly, reverently, and she let him. As they walked back toward the townhouse, the sunlight broke through the clouds, warm, gentle, full of promise. They would return to Ravenshire not as strangers bound by duty, but as two hearts learning, slowly and bravely, to beat together. The Duke, who had promised never to love, finally did, and for the first time, Helena allowed herself to believe he might never stop.